bro.
I was trying to what we're supposed to do.
I got these big robot headphones.
Oh my God,
bro.
we're live. We're in an argument and we're live. What's going on, everybody?
What's up?
Hey.
Glad nobody's watching this. All right.
How do you know?
Right, exactly.
You can see because you can see the number right here. Oh, we got one.
Not on my screen.
See,
I'm gonna rely on you.
Don't. That's because you're.
I'm a guest.
Yeah, you're just a guest.
Just a guest.
Right.
Oh.
But you're a special guest, is what you are.
Thank you.
What's going on, everybody? We are live.
Yes.
Local Musicians XP. We're just chatting it up, having some fun here with our friend Mark Podhorzer, all the way from Brooklyn.
Yes.
Brooklyn. Okay, well, that's okay. So, what's the correct pronunciation of your name?
No, you pronounce it great. Podhorzer, just like it's spelled.
Podhorzer.
Yes.
Mark Pod. Is that what you're officially more called?
And you on a podcast. Look at that, man.
It's a podcast. I have an iPod. Yeah, we can go through the whole thing.
Pod means foot, incidentally.
That's right.
Yeah.
I got big feet as well. So.
Oh, okay.
Hey, man. We don't need to know all that personal information.
Hey, man, he said he's gonna step in that.
Keep it PG. You told me to keep it PG, so we'll keep it PG.
It's like you put a foot in that speaker, man. If y'all don't do the thing right, you know.
Good to see. We'll just let some people get on here. We are just
got Brian in there, man. Boy. Okay.
Yeah, Brian is on it, man. Brian is on it. Brian is
where's Brad?
Great cat. Yeah, what happened to Brad? I don't know, because Brad didn't even get a message from Brad.
Oh man, I'm gonna have to get that 5 minutes.
He ain't doing nothing.
Brad. I'm about to hit him up right now. Don't worry.
What's he doing? He ain't doing nothing. He ain't got no job.
Not anymore.
Retired. He's sitting at home with his 25 drum sets and 35 basses and
that's all.
A million guitars.
You say that's all? Oh wow.
He got Guitar Center in his basement, dude.
Yes.
He'd be at Guitar Center every day.
Wow.
Trying to find something new. All right.
He's a nice cat, though. Good.
Oh,
nice,
man. He's a
cat.
great friend of ours, but we just give him a hard time.
Because
that's what you do when you're great friends with people. You give them a hard time. That's how you know you're good friends. That's how Mark and I started to get a little rapport, as we were just like joning on each other, like, right, you know, he's giving it to
I don't do that with people I don't like, so you just
well, you must have liked me instantly, because you started joning me right at the beginning. How's your headphones, Tyrell?
He cut you the first time he was on. The first
time seconds, I think it was it.
Yeah, it's like, you thought it was us with the echo.
He was like, whoa.
No, it's okay. I can take it though.
Okay. That's what you want, man.
My wife wants me to be a little bit less that way, but you know, I know when it can fit the.
It's the New York, bro. You have to keep the New York in there. Yeah, but I'm excited about our special guest because we spoke earlier about a myriad of things. I learned a lot of things about the music business and how it operated in yesteryear and how it's operating now. And man, you were right in the thick of things. So I'm just so excited.
Yeah, so let's properly introduce this cat.
Yeah. I gotta say my excitement, bro. You can introduce him formally, bro.
Bruh, here come Brad. Brad already left a message, bruh. Sent me a message on Messenger. He says, no icon today.
Oh, I just texted him. Let me see if he
paid attention to the overlay, bro.
Very nice, very nice.
You guys are icons in my book, so we'll.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right. So let's properly introduce our good friend Mark Podhorzer. Yes. He is a degreed accountant. Worked for local NYC accounting firm. From 75 to 78, he was the controller of Roulette Records in New York City, which is an old independent label whose artists included Betty Carter, Art Blakey, Little Anthony and the Imperials, Tommy James and the Shondells, for those old school people. In 78 through 80, he was tour manager and tour accountant for the Pat Travers band, which I would love to talk a little bit more about Pat Travers. He was very underrated cat. And he was Travers was opening act for and headlining act also in those years. 75, 78 controller. We already said that.
I
Let's
think we've
see.
hit
So
that. Yeah,
then,
I'm getting younger.
yes, and then 78 through 80, tour manager, tour account Travers, and then he opened for Rush, AC/DC, The Outlaws, REO Speedwagon, et cetera, et cetera. 80 to 87, he was controller for American Talent International. New York City is a booking agent, so he has that experience as well. They had some great clients: Kiss, REO Speedwagon, Hall and Oates, Joni Mitchell, Neil Young, just to name a few. In 87 through 88, he was financial manager for Kiss. I have to hear all the stories about that
Not that
because
many.
Gene Simmons is a marketer extraordinaire,
He is.
and I need to hear some stories about that.
I'll
And
try.
then 90 through 91, he was another booking agent for Aim High Productions in Atlanta. And 91 through 2020 was an accountant at On the Mark Business Management, his own accounting firm specializing in arts and entertainment industry. Clients included Derek Trucks, Driving and Crying, Blind Boys of Alabama, etc. And now my man is officially retired.
Spending my weeks seeing Chris Burroughs behind the drum kit in as many places as possible.
So Mark and I met. I am the current drummer in the Mike Veal band, and that's where I met Mark and several other just great music loving people that come out every week to see the band and support the band. And so it's been great building a relationship with some of these guys and talking to them and just getting to know who they are. And Mark and I started to just get some conversations going. And turns out that he's got some great experience back in the day in terms of how the music business worked. And those are the things that we kind of want to touch on today.
Sure.
Is the music business of the past and how bands went about their business, how promotion went, how the managers worked, how the money changed hands, how some of these guys built their audiences, and just talk to him about some of his experiences in that. So, Mark, why don't you just give us a little bit of how did you get into that business?
Really lucky, and like you said, I was a degreed accountant for 3 years. They actually specialized in corrugated boxes, so they're sitting around talking about cardboard all day, and I was like, no, this is not for me. I quit that and drove cross country with a friend for 2.5 months in the summer of '75. Came back, and as a matter of fact, my mother was looking through the Sunday Times and saw a job ad for a record company accountant. So she tells me, I go for the appointment, seems to go well. And the woman says, you know what? You seem like you're qualified, but it's at a record company. They're kind of loose. It's a rock and roll environment, and you were in a suit to your interview. And I said, look, trust me, I'm a rock and roll guy. I might be an accountant, but that's my thing. And I put myself out there, and she said, okay. And I got the job. So there I was at Roulette Records doing accounting and royalties, and they also had a one of those TV record deals like KTEL used to do, and they had this Disco Hustle. They sold multiple million copies of this thing in 1975. And then I met. They were partners in a record store in Boston called Strawberry Records and Tapes, with a booking agency, the ATI. So I would go up there and count inventory of records, and made connections in the agency. And one day he said, look, rock bands need accountants on the road, which is something I never really thought about. And like 2 months later, there I was with the Pat Travers band on the road, and everything basically connections. It's all connections, who you meet. And, it went from there.
So did you have an interview with the artist or meet the artist, or they just sort of?
No, basically it was the manager, a guy named David Hemmings, who had been with Black Sabbath in England and with the band called the Straubs, and the Tourists, which was Annie Lennox's first band. So he had management experience over there. They had an office over here. They were managing Pat, who had been living in England. And I met with him, and I barely even remember what we talked about. And next thing I know, 3 weeks later, I was in Virginia Beach with Pat Travers' band in a club date, and that was it.
So give us a little backstory on who Pat Travers was, and because you told me a couple things that I didn't know about him.
Right.
So give us a little overview of who Pat was and who he is still today. He's still out there doing it.
He is. So Pat was born in Toronto, and I think in his teen years he would go down to the Toronto clubs on Yonge Street, which is their kind of famous entertainment district, and he'd be playing. And then I don't know if this is true, but I heard he was Ronnie Hawkins discovered him, but that could be hearsay. But at some point he moved to England because he thought he could get his career started there, and he got signed to Polydor, and he did 3 records over there, I believe. And then he moved to America. And so basically he's a great, great guitar player, blues influenced. But he had a couple of big radio songs, Boom, Boom, Out Go the Lights, and Snorting Whiskey, Drinking Cocaine, which were 2 big #1 radio hits in 78, 79, 80. And he was started in the clubs, moved into the theaters, and then you get on the arena tours with the bigger acts, Rush and REO and AC/DC, etc. You build your support through that, plus the record airplay you're getting on the radio, and you put out an album, and then you go out on the road, and at some point you're ready to take the next step to headlining, which he did in 1980. And after that, he got to a certain level, and then he went out. Then MTV came along. Then it's into the video thing, but he's been doing it. It's now 50 years down the road. He just recently played City Winery in April, I believe it was. So he's still doing his thing all these years later.
I have a quick question for you.
What's that?
I'm sorry. I got a quick question for you because you mentioned "Boom Boom Out Goes the Lights," which is a Lil Walter song.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
And that song has gotten some backlash recently because of
physical violence and whatever.
Right.
Yeah,
so does he have to not do that song, perform that song now?
No, he still did it at the City. It's a great sing along. I mean, right. I think you take it with a grain of salt type of thing, but it is an old, old song, but that was a staple. It was on one of his albums. It was a staple in the live show, and continues to do it to this day.
Wow, nice.
What is that song about, man? I didn't even know.
Oh yeah. Go listen to the lyrics.
If I get him in my sights, boom, boom, out go the lights.
And his girl, if his girl is looking at another guy or something like that, boom, boom, out goes the lights. It is a good song, sonically.
I'm not sure how many people are paying attention to the lyrics.
Oh,
Most people like the vibe of the song.
I like the way Mark said this. Yeah, it's a song about physical violence. Yeah.
Oh my God, that's hilarious, man.
So so I mean, I've seen him every time he's come to Atlanta since, which is not that often, but he had a huge following on the West Coast and pockets here and there around the country, but just like Chris said to me the other day, like you get that whiff of success, but you don't get to taste it. It's a tough thing.
If you if anybody out there is enjoys rock blues, but also kind of some stretched stuff and a little bit of funkiness and even maybe some jazz kind of overtones, I recommend I found a concert that he did just a couple years ago at a place called the Funky Biscuit, which is a really great venue in Boca Raton from 2021. Go check that out to get a real kind of feel of where he's coming from. Great band, trio, power trio. And you'll get a real sense of kind of what he wanted to do, which is interesting because a lot of these cats now they're they can kind of do what they want to do, right? They're not under a label, they're not under anything, so they really get to play the music that they want to, versus having to sort of appease the record company. Back then you have to have a single,
Mm-hmm.
you have to schmooze the radio station, blah blah blah, your show has to be structured a certain way because of who's on the bill, all that kind of stuff. But now they're a little more freed up to kind of do what they want to do. So so that's a cool thing. So then, working with Pat, how long did it take him before he was headlining shows versus when he was opening shows?
So Pat always had a great musicians with him, and in the tour I was there, it was Tommy Aldridge on drums, who's gone on
Tommy.
to Ozzy and Whitesnake and all of these other bands. Was also started in Black Oak, Arkansas. Pat Thrall on guitar, who did use Thrall with Glenn Hughes, and then Mars Cowling, who was an incredible bass player. So I joined them in late '78. They were opening for the Rushes and the Outlaws and the AC/DCs. At the end of that year, they recorded the live album "Go For What You Know" as headliners in a few theaters in Florida. But after that record came out, they still went out as support for AC/DC and what have you. It was when the next album, Crash and Burn, came out, the one with Stone Whiskey on it, that they went out as headliners, and did fairly well. But most times tours would have they would have a package. You'd have the headliner, and the opening act would be usually booked by the same booking agency. Like when Pat went out with AC/DC or REO or Kiss or Rush, they were all ATI acts. And it would be from city to city, the two bands would go together. When Pat went out, they had no support until the West Coast when Def Leppard joined the tour. So you'd have local bands as the opening act. These guys were wearing platform shoes and bell bottoms in Davenport and the Ames, Iowas, and those kind of places. And so he had a tough time in those kind of theaters. But on the West Coast, he did really well. But then, if I'm not mistaken, the record label decides, okay, we're going to put our money somewhere else. And then we wound up doing a Canadian tour with Ted Nugent, Travers in the middle, and the Scorpions as the opener. So Pat's gone from owning the stage as a headliner to now being the middle act of three, and you got no stage and no sound checks and whatever. So first night, Ted Nugent comes into the dressing room after the show and walks in and goes, "How's everybody doing?" And the guys go like, "What do you think?" And Ted goes, "I see minimum smiles." That was the term he used, minimum smiles.
Nice.
So, it was it was kind of like you're up here and then all of a sudden now you're back here again. And now I got to climb up again. So it was we Ted on his whatever trampoline, not trampolines, those flying, the acrobats. What did I do?
Trapeze.
Trapeze artist?
No.
Trapeze, yeah. He was flying and hanging and climbing ropes in his loincloth. It wasn't quite for me. But we started in Vancouver or Victoria City and moved across and went to Calgary and Edmonton, all of these Canadian rocky towns. So that was fun.
Well, we think in terms of everything is global now, but it wasn't like that. Like you were talking to us about maybe every tour had its own pockets of area that you would be in. Could you kind of talk about that a little bit, about what it used to be like, sections of people or bands being promoted in certain areas of the country?
I mean, there were, bands had neighborhood. I mean, like, look at Atlanta. You had a band like the Producers, Driving and Crying,
Mother's Finest.
So Driving and Crying had a couple of hit songs, but there were still, I don't think they could go out anywhere out of the South really at this point. That's where their base was, and that's where it stays now. And you had, New York had Marshall Crenshaw, who had great pop records, but, did well in New York, and just the rest of the country didn't get it. There was also a band called Novo Combo, which Michael Shrieve from Santana was in. Very Police-like, also big in New York, and then just never really expanded. So I think if you look, there was a band out of Cleveland, the Michael Stanley Band, huge in Cleveland, didn't really go anywhere. Bob Seger was a kind of an anomaly because he was huge in Detroit for years, and then exploded with night moves, and then he became, you know, national, international, whatever. So it happens quite a bit where you've got that local kingpins, and then just can't really expand the base for whatever reason, whether it's musical tastes or promotion or record company, or who really knows why.
I would think there's a lot of politics involved in that. Just
It's politics and everything, unfortunately.
I mean, right. Yeah, just who likes who. Somebody
Mm-hmm.
gets anointed this, you know. Bob Seger was huge. You know, in the Midwest. I'm from
Right.
Rockford, Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't go, you know, a minute seemed like without hearing something that he was doing. You know, I know he went down to Muscle Shoals and recorded some of it. I can't remember what record it was, one of those big records. He goes down to Muscle Shoals and, you know, and records there. And, you know, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's just a lot of it's right place, right time. A lot of it's what you know, do you have the right look, blah, blah, blah. And with somebody like Pat, it's probably easy for a cat like that to kind of just fall in the cracks. And
Right. There's a lot of guys
he,
like that, and they're similar. And, you know, how do you break out? Got a quick Bob Seger story. But after a couple of club dates with Pat at the beginning, we had my first arena show as the opener for Bob Seger. I think it was in Largo or Landover, Maryland, one of those two places. And I looked, and Springsteen had played there the night before, so I was like pissed off I didn't get to see him. But so the next morning, I go down to the coffee shop in the hotel, and there's Bob eating breakfast by himself with a hat pulled down over his head. And I'm like, man, this guy is up there, and then he's like a nobody in this little coffee shop in the hotel. So kind of was eye-opening to me that he was just that down-to-earth guy that didn't need an entourage around him, and he was just go down and eat by himself.
Nice.
So and then after Pat, did you start working with Kiss?
No, I had after Pat, and then, you know, the record label decides they're going to put their money somewhere else, and the tour support kind of starts to fade out, because you know, really the money that the band is making on the road is not enough to sustain the band with the, you know, the travel and the equipment and the salaries and the per diems and the hotels and you name it. So the label provides tour support. You know, it's part of your contract, but it's a loan. It's an advance. So you're going to ultimately pay that back at some point in time.
Right.
But
I wish more people knew that. Yeah.
Yeah, but it keeps you going. And at some point, the label goes, you know what? You know, we've got a limited amount of funds. We have this other band that's got some major people in it. We're going to start pushing them a little bit and maybe taking away some of your money. So at that point, I went to work for the booking agency that Pat was associated with. So I did that for 7 years or so. And that involved, you know, dealing with promoters and getting deposits in, and dealing with the acts, and, you know, settling up after the shows are played. So, you know, that was it. And I got to go to a lot of shows for free in New York during the 80s. So it was a great time to be there.
Well, what would you, just touching on a couple of things about tour support, what it actually takes to sustain a tour, if they have a tour bus, if they have, just like you said, you have per diem, you have hotels, you have XXX.
Right.
Back in you know, 78, what would you say the average cost was for?
Man, that was hard. I mean, and you know, if my memory serves me well, on some of those bigger, you know, tours, the band was getting like $1,000 a night as an opening act, 1,500, 2,000, unless you were like big in that area and they needed you as a special guest, you know. But basically the guarantees were, that's nothing.
That's
and
1,000 a night.
1,000 a night. And so that's why you need the tour support. And the, you know, the guys are getting salaries, even though it was 1978, you're still, you know, a couple $100 a week in salary. $15 a day, $150 a week in per diem, which is not salary. It's for you to, spend your money on alcohol and food.
Right.
And then the bus, which is coming out of the tour support money. And then the management is getting their 15 to 20%. The booking agent's getting 10%. So whatever the act is making on the road, they're only netting 70% of that. And then they've got to pay all those expenses. So I couldn't even imagine the numbers, but you need, to do a proper tour, you need tour support in the $250,000 range to keep you alive out there for that, couple of months.
I mean, because that money goes fast,
Really,
right?
really fast
out there, right?
Right.
So,
Even the guys are rooming in hotels. Everybody had a roommate, so there's two guys to a room. So you've got the band, which is 4-piece. Then they've got out front sound and monitor guy, me, and then light and sound guys. So you could have 15 guys, 20 guys out on the road that you're paying their salaries. And there's a crew bus and a band bus and a truck. And so you got a truck driver that you've hired who, drives all night to get to the next show. There's a lot of people you're responsible for and you're paying for.
And so what at that time is merchandise, I guess, t-shirts, posters. Are they selling vinyl at the shows yet?
No.
Probably not really, because they can't because of the record company commitment. So
Pat Hughes, a merchandiser out of Macon, who I actually went to work for a couple of years in the late 80s, called Great Southern. And they had ZZ Top and Cyndi Lauper, and they had English bands like Depeche Mode and Robert Plant. And so basically they had their own guy on the road with a merch truck who followed the band around, and they sold, I think it was only t-shirts. I don't think there was any vinyl or even posters at that point. It was just t-shirts. And
what's the average cost of a t-shirt?
And when I started working for the merchandise company, I realized that, there's a whole cost of goods kind of thing. So whatever they pay, the t-shirt costs the merchandiser about 16% of the total. The hall is taking a cut, like 20%, 30 or 40, it depends. Back in the day, the halls weren't really that involved in it. So it was the bands getting a royalty per shirt or per whatever. And some bands are getting up to 40% of the sales price. I can't remember what it was back in the day, but it's probably in the 20s to 30s. And then you got 16%. Then the merchandiser, has to cover his costs and whatever. And then everything else after that is gravy. But at some point in the late 70s, it got to where bands were demanding huge advances before they would go out on tour. $5 million before a shirt had been sold, before anything happened. They want that money, earn an interest and what have you. So the merchandiser has to go to another person as a banker to kind of bankroll, because they're not sitting on $5 million. Right. So, and that became the general rule. Every band was like, I want this amount of money advance.
And that's, but that's debt, right? That's not like they're
right. So So the first $5 million of royalties that the band might earn on the shirts, they're not going to see it because they're in debt for the advance. But there's no guarantee that tour is going to make $5 million. So you could be in the hole for your next tour before you even go out. So,
and that's why cats have to stay on the road, right? That's kind of
that's where the money, especially now, because record sales have plummeted really. So that's where people are making their money.
I mean, I just, and to one of the, shout out to one of the greatest ever, George Clinton. We just saw George Clinton 2 weeks ago at Symphony Hall with Fishbone, and he can barely stand up. He can barely, he'll say a couple things every now and then, but I don't know if you've ever been to a George Clinton show.
I haven't.
It's, it's pretty much let's just say there's a lot of people on stage.
Okay. Yes.
And it's sort of, so, and he's got some younger people that it was just kind of interesting, but they're trying to do all the the hype stuff and talk
Right.
to the and get everybody, and he's like sitting in this chair, and it
How
was just
old
like,
is he?
man,
How long ago was that, Chris?
that was 2 weeks ago.
Oh wow, because he had looked better last year.
I
He
just
looked really good.
I taught it to, it was at Symphony Hall. I just saw him literally 2
Man.
weeks ago. And I know he's been in court for a long time over a couple of different things, but trying to get royalties and get money, whatever.
Yeah.
But I was just like, man, is he there because he wants to be there, or does he kind of have to be there? It's like, because Clinton's the parliament thing has always been about. I mean, there's 30 people on stage, man.
Right,
And
right.
I don't know how that organization figures all that out. I'm sure not everybody's getting paid, but he's got 4 guitar players on stage, So I can only imagine like the debt that
Payroll, yeah.
that organization has got to be in. But something interesting that you said, if $5 million, this is what year?
This was
That you said-
1970. Okay, this was I worked for them from 88 to 90. So this was late 80s. Let's say 89.
Okay. And that seems like, I don't know what that number is now. It's got to be,
Like Taylor Swift or
Taylor
Springsteen
Swift.
when they go out. I mean, I just went to see Springsteen at Wrigley Field. So the t-shirts are $50 a piece and the poster is 60. But you got to buy them.
And Taylor Swift just got a shout out by Bill Belichick of all people.
Right.
So where
Yeah.
that merchandise has got to be through the roof.
Uh-huh. Worlds collide.
So we have a super fan question. Brad Thomas asks you, have you ever seen a road act go broke before the tour was over?
Not personally. I'm sure it happens. Usually, I mean, nowadays you've got bands that are going out on the road before they have a record deal just to get their name out, and you got to do that. That's how you get people interested. Once you could start selling tickets in a club, somebody will start taking notice, and maybe the guy that booked you will have a friend and go, hey, this band came in and they sold us out, and we're adding 2 shows next time. So word gets out, and then maybe a manager comes sniffing around or an agent comes sniffing around. And whether one comes first or the other, it's almost immaterial, but ultimately they'll start working, and you kind of do it on the cheap when you start out. So you're gonna be in a van or your own car or whatever. You're gonna stay on people's couches and do what you have to do so that you don't go broke before the tour ends. But the bands that I was associated with back in the day and through the agency were all on the record labels, and so there was tour support or something to keep them sustained while they were out there on the road.
Interesting. What?
Oh wow.
Yeah. So our another super fan of ours, Brian,
doing his accounting work there.
Yes. 5 million equals 12.3 million today.
So if you kind of do the math, to come up with 40% of a t-shirt at $50 a shirt, that's $20. How many shirts do you have to sell at $20 to equal $12 million to equal that royalty amount?
Right.
I'm trying to what the Fishbone, who's one of the greatest bands of all time, but just have never gotten that sort of acclaim.
Mm-hmm.
But what was interesting was their merchandise prices were higher than George Clinton's. And I can understand they're a smaller band. They're trying to make more money.
Right.
T-shirt was like $40 or something. Whereas the Parliament shirts were like maybe $30 or something.
Mm-hmm.
So, because I guess you just got to make that money any way you can, man, and merch is a great way for an artist to make some cash.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Back in the day, in those late 80s, they would look at merch numbers, and if you were doing $10 a head, that was considered really good. And Depeche Mode did that. Cyndi Lauper did that. Madonna was doing that. Guns N' Roses were doing that. So those are good numbers. So
$10 a head, meaning how many people you have in the seats.
right. So you got 20,000 people there at 10,000. So you're walking out $200,000 in merchandise, which is
Wow.
a nice number back then. And
Would you
church
have that
obviously was
kind of?
cheaper back then.
Would you have that kind of inventory for 200,000 people?
No, it's not 200. It's 20,000
Oh,
people.
20,000 people. But
Right.
would you have merchandise for that?
So you got people are spending an average of $10. So that's $200,000 worth of T-shirts you're selling.
Right. But would you have inventory to support 20,000 people or even 2,000 people? I mean, that's a lot of...
Those trucks drive around with T-shirts,
Wow.
floor to ceiling with merch, and
Wow.
when they need more, they have it shipped in.
Wow. Crazy.
So, but I mean, if the shirts are $30 and you're averaging 10, so 1 out of 3 people maybe is buying a shirt. So 20,000 people, maybe you need 8,000 shirts or 6,500 or whatever that.
Right.
How would you advise a person to start a tour now, a road tour? Let's say if they want to do it out of their own pocket, or how would you advise somebody to do that?
Don't.
Yeah.
We know some people from friends of ours whose son is in a local band called I'll give them a shout out, called Calico. They're kind of a jammy Allman Brothers meets Little Feat meets whatever. Great players, and they're out there without a record deal. They put out their own self-produced thing. I'm sure they're doing it in a van and sleeping on couches and what have you, and they're a support act in the middle act or whatever, but that's how you got to do it. You got to get your chops down. You got to see what life is like out there and build your fan base. That's the way to do it. Unless you can start with put out something like Royal did in Australia, and you get a record deal immediately. And whether she even tours or not, I have no clue. But
what was, in your opinion, what was the best way for a band to build a fan base back in 78, 79, 80?
I mean, I was playing live and getting noticed, and then getting a record deal. And then if you can get to a major agency, they'll book you in the clubs first, but ultimately they want to get you as an opening act on a major tour.
Well, that's kind of where I was going with it. So so many people now want to just jump on the big stage, right? Right. I can do this. And they haven't really cut their teeth in being able to, you're going to find out a lot about yourself when you play for 5 people.
Right.
Of how passionate you really are about this thing and how bad you want this thing.
Right.
And there's a lot of great stories about Bruce Springsteen in those Jersey clubs, man, playing those clubs night after night, just honing his craft, building his muscle, building the band, working on seeing what works, what doesn't.
Reading the crowd, all of that. You're right.
Learning how to play to a crowd, learning how to understand when the crowd is giving you a certain energy, how to keep that. I mean, there's so many of those lessons that we just, people don't want to even experience now. And when all of the people that we love, or most of the people, that's what they did. I mean, Prince was, they play in small clubs. I mean,
exactly.
But look at the pedigree of people they played with before. I mean, Jimi Hendrix, before he did his thing, he was with the Isley Brothers, Little Richard, Eric Clapton,
the Monkees. Don't forget the Monkees.
Exactly.
The Monkees. Yeah, I mean, you got to pay your dues in some of these bands to learn what to do.
Right.
Pay your dues.
The band, how many years back in, Ronnie Hawkins, and before they hit it big, So, Pat, I'm sure, learned his craft on the stages in Toronto, but went to England and honed it even more. You're an entertainer, basically. You've got to entertain the crowd, unless you're, the Dead or the Allman Brothers that are just playing, and not really putting on a quote unquote show, but the people are paying money to see a show. And, certainly Springsteen is the greatest entertainer I've seen, where he's taking bits of James Brown and the Beatles and the Stone, just it became his. Um,
Right.
but yeah, you've got to work at it. You've got to know how to work the crowd, know how to play with your, bandmates,
Right.
when to give them space, when to let them solo, when to
Right.
step back and let them shine. And how do you get along with each other? It's a fit. It's like, a team sport in a
Mm-hmm.
sense. You got to have
Mm-hmm.
personalities that gel, and it's a whole dynamic.
Any stories that you could tell without maybe naming names of maybe fights or something happened on the
Um,
tour? Talking about gelling.
um, there was, I mean, the guys were great. They got along well, and occasionally you had guys. Well, I had this incident where I was I was on the road for a while, and they hired a guitar tech for Pat Thrall, the other guitar player,
Uh-huh.
and he had just been with Led Zeppelin.
Okay.
So he comes over, and like after 2 nights, I'm going, I can't room with this guy. There's just no way. He's like a Led Zeppelin to the nth degree. Whatever you think of Led Zeppelin on the road in those days, he was up there. So I'm
Right.
like, no, I'm not getting along. I don't care. He's got to sleep somewhere else. So that was one thing. But the other one was it was in England, and I don't know what brought it on, but there was a kerfuffle between two of the members of the band, and the band went on as a trio that night. Um,
Oh,
and it's like that's when I realized I'm a babysitter to adults, and the manager had to be on the phone for hours and crying and tears and whatever, and then they hugged it out and all went well the next night. But still, it's like, what the hell.
wow.
Right.
So at that point, I realized I'd never want to be a manager. I expect adults to act like adults and not be led by the hand. So,
Yeah.
We got some stories of our own around
I
here
bet you
of
do.
Too.
You've been on the road
similar
probably more
similar
than I
things.
have, actually.
Yeah. So just going back a little bit to the building your chops thing,
Hmm.
and were you able to, so when a record company was quote unquote trying to uh I guess break a band or develop a
Right, right,
band, you had a certain amount of, usually you would have a certain amount of time. They weren't expecting everything or expecting in that first record or maybe
right,
that
right.
second record. They were trying to kind of build you if they
Exactly.
believed in you. um that doesn't exist today at all.
Right. No,
But what's can you, what's your philosophy, or not your philosophy, but just tell us a little bit about that and how they were able to sort of build build these bands and then try to develop them for the long haul.
exactly. So you talk about playing in front of 8 people. I think the Police, they played Poughkeepsie, New York, and there were 8 people in the audience their first tour. Again, it's you gotta want it to play and get out there and do it. I think in the old days, the record company would let you work your way up. Springsteen's first album was not a major hit. The second, it was Born to Run, his third, that really put him on the map. Um, Lots of guys are like that. So Travers had his fourth record was the live album, and that kind of pushed him up there. But the record company will, like I said, pay their tour support, keep you out on the road, get you good tours if they can. And it's sometimes the opening act slot is almost up for bid. If the band is really big enough that they can make your or break your career as an opening act, you'll have support acts like trying to bid to become that act. But
Oh, bid.
they'll
So how does that work? How did that work?
it's it's connections and whatever, people trying to get the inside track. I'm not sure it's really quote unquote any money involved, but there's a lot of infighting and to try to get an opening act slot for a major tour back then. But the rate, the record company would put ads in the trades. They, to have you set up interviews at radio stations. You do in stores at record stores. Pat and the guys used to drive those, like to drive those Malibu Grand Prix cars, So we did some in stores at the Malibu Grand Prix so we could ride the cars for free for a couple hours. So, anything to get, the band out in front of the fans and keep it going and build for the future. So they would look at the record sales. Okay, we had a significant increase from record 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. And at some point they might look at it and go, hey, look, you're just not going to get there. And they, that's it. They'll cut their ties and cut their losses. But then
some of the managers probably would vie for their persons too, right? Some of the managers would vie for their people too. It's like, hey,
right. You might have multiple acts on a label or whatever.
Right.
So, hey, I might pull my bigger act if you don't keep my smaller act going.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We have 2 questions in the chat for Mark. Was the expense for the traveling accountant something the band paid for or the record company? And the second question is, how did you do your accounting on the road? In a hotel room or in the venue office? So
I was on payroll. I was paid by the management company. I got a weekly check deposited into my bank account, and since I had the cash, I paid my per diems to myself and the guys in the band. So no, I mean, in a sense, the record company was funding it with their tour support, but in reality, I was an employee of the band, so to speak, as well as anybody else. Oh, cool. And it was before computers, so I did my accounting on a spreadsheet, one of those things you see in Office Depot. You had the cash in and the cash out and columns across the top. Hotels were always on a credit card, but have a column for per diems or taxi fares or whatever, office supplies, whatever you weren't using a credit card for. And at the end of the day, you total it up. I count the cash in my pocket or in my briefcase or wherever it was being stored, make sure it was tying in, and then we'll move on to the next day. It was always usually in the hotel room. I never brought that kind of stuff into the venue for the most part.
Right. So as you sort of move into being more of a talent broker, what made you was that just you wanted to stay in the business and then you were just looking for a different, or did one thing just lead to another, or how did that work?
Well, as the record label stopped, was reducing the tour support, and the band really couldn't afford to have a separate guy do accounting. You'll find that a lot of bands, either out front sound guy or light guy is their accountant on the road when they can't afford an accountant. So they couldn't afford me anymore. So the booking agent was looking for somebody in their office. So that's how I just kind of moved over there, because they were Pat's agency. So I knew a bunch of people at the agency, and it just kind of fell in my lap at the right time at the right place.
And what were you as a talent?
So I was in the accounting side of things. So my job
I see. Okay.
So the agents would, basically the band would do a record and then go on tour, and the agent would set up the tour, well in advance, and call the promoters around the country. Each part of the country has their own promotion. Before Live Nation bought everybody up, but you'd have different promoters, Ron Delsner and John Shearer in New York, Don Law in Boston, Avalon and Brian Murphy in California, Jam in Chicago, Arnie Granite in Richardson, Jerry Michelson, and the South had Lone Star and Lou Messina in Florida. So each part of the country had their own promoter,
right?
Or competing promoters, and you would play one against the other. But promoters would always want to say, "Hey, I had the band the last 4 times. I want them again." But the agent would have a price in mind based on the market, based on the size of the venue, based on the travel plan. Was it an extra date they needed to fill in, or was it a major? And they would get on the phone and start calling people and saying, so and so is on tour starting these dates, and we're looking at these dates in your market. This is what we're looking for, and that's how it would be done. So once those dates got settled, once the dates are out and booked, the promoter was required to provide 50% deposit of the guarantee. Now, that was set up years ago. 50%. Basically, the agent's only keeping 10, so they're holding 40% of the money at that point. But that's the way it was done. And the only ones who didn't do that, Bill Graham paid 10%. He said, that's your commission. That's all I'm giving you as a deposit. And schools often paid 0, and you would pick up in full at the school. But otherwise, the band would pick up 50% of what they're owed at the gig after playing.
So what was the, as a promoter in these times, how are you going about promoting a show?
I think it depends on who the act is. I mean, Kiss, you just say Kiss is coming and boom, they're sold out. I don't think you have to do much. I think the bigger acts, Rush and Cheap Trick at the time and AC/DC and whatever, they don't need much promotion. They're pretty much going to sell out wherever they're playing with limited. You make an announcement, you put an ad in the paper, the radio station is, hey, Kiss is coming to town March 4th, whatever. That's going to be enough. It's when the show's not selling that the promoter really has to do the work. And then, they might have you come to the radio station to hype it, or do an in-store to hype it, or, plaster the town with posters and radio ads and what have you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I was, if there's an upstart or a smaller band, or, what's sort of the, how does that go about? Does it go from, is he on the street doing the putting the posters up and handing out flyers, going to the radio station? Mm-hmm. Okay.
I would say yes. I mean, or, like I'll take, for example, the Bottom Line in New York City, on Bleecker Street. They put a thing outside, these are the acts that are performing for the next month. And, people, the ad in the Times every Sunday or whatever, and people know where to find it or where to look for it. But those are smaller clubs with, limited venue capacity. So they only have to bring in a certain amount. Whereas nobody's touring arenas unless they're really big enough to kind of sell a minimal amount of tickets. It's the ones where you say, well, it's in between, can they fill that or not? And you try to go for the bigger venue. And sometimes it's, half empty, and that doesn't look good either.
Yeah, I would imagine the opening act for some of those bands, if like Kiss had them or whatever,
right,
would just would be a great marketing tool for them, just to get piggyback off of that crowd.
It is, but at the same time, if they're all there for Kiss, maybe they don't even want to hear you.
Right.
So
right.
They're just like, we want Kiss the whole time, and then like you're just trying to play through that kind of crowd.
Right.
Pat was well known enough, when I was with him, that he had fans that were coming to see him, plus the headliner. And as the opener, you're limited to a certain amount of time, because the headliners want us to do their 90 minutes or 2 hours. So Pat would go on sometimes 5 minutes early. The ticket would say 7:30, and he'd go on at 7:25, so he could play that one extra song.
That's a nice little trick right there.
Yeah.
That's a good little trick.
Quite often, in his markets where he was more successful, and people wanted to see as much of him as maybe the headliner, he would do that extra 5 minutes.
What was rock and roll like in Canada? That's that.
I mean, it's like America. I mean, they had, you got Bryan Adams, you had Loverboy back in the day, you had, the band came out of Canada.
Okay.
Rush, obviously, Triumph. They had some name acts that came out of there.
Oh, cool.
Shania Twain.
Shania, yeah, that's right. That's right.
Uh-huh.
Speaking of playing, when Tyrone asked you about the opening, just getting on the opening, or to get an opening band slot on a major tour, and what a coup that could be. I mean, do you guys know the story about when Prince opened for the Rolling Stones? Do you guys know that story at all?
Fill us in.
So this is like 1980.
Don't tease us, bro.
Just one, something like that. And so Prince is in his, well, he's always in this phase for a while, but he's in the thigh highs and high heel phase, right? So, but he's playing what's really just rock funk kind of stuff, but his appearance is what it's just throwing people off. So Mick Jagger is a fan and sees this kid and he's like, oh my God, this kid's blah blah blah. We got to get him to open. So they go on he goes on tour and he does one show, gets booed off the stage
I could see it.
because
Yeah.
it's it's
Who
the
is
Rolling
this guy?
Stones.
Yeah.
It's the Rolling Stones crowd. It's
Right.
Hell's Angels in the front.
Mhm.
It's whatever. So and then they had to Mick Jagger, he was so discouraged about it, but Mick talked him into going back again and say, hey man, just try it again. We really love you. Blah blah blah. Goes back again. Same thing happens. Cuts the show. And splits. But it was the kind of thing that he always said it made him hungrier. It hurt at the time.
Oh, I'm sure.
But he was like, okay, I got something for everybody.
Well, you gotta make it through those boos, right? Look at Stevie Ray Vaughan made it through the boos, and and you got to the resiliency it takes. Moxie,
the resiliency and the that's really what's going to push you through, not getting the love all the time and the fake claps and the fake.
Trying to figure it out. You got to try to figure it out.
And how? I mean, if you don't go through it, how are you going to figure it out?
Right.
Exactly.
And that's just to kind of play into more of what we see today with the everybody gets a trophy, right? Everybody's everybody's
participation trophy.
Yeah. How do people know if they really have it or they don't? And that's a real question,
right?
I mean, what y'all think about that? Like, how do people know if they really got it or they don't?
I saw Springsteen in '73 as an opening act to Chicago, and didn't know who he was too far away to really even see what was going on. There was no big screens back in the day. So he could have put on the greatest show of all time, and he might have, but he decided he doesn't want to be an opening act anymore because he couldn't really get the crowd to pay attention. And I think he also played for Anne Murray. Remember her?
Oh, Jesus.
As an opening act at Central Park as well. So how they booked those two together, I have no idea.
That's out right there.
But talking about Prince, I remember I had just started at the booking agency, and one of the agent's assistants comes back in the morning and he goes, man, I saw Prince last night at Radio City. It was the greatest show I ever saw in my life. And I'm thinking, what? But over the years you realize that he was right. So it's just so I don't know what year the Stones tour you were talking about.
It's about 80, 81, 80, 81.
So he'd already played Radio City already. And then went as an opening act to the Stones and wasn't accepted. So sell out Radio City and the Stones fans don't want you. So it's kind of weird.
Well, but it's also, it kind of humbles you into, you have to kind of be humbled sometimes in what's real and what's not real. And, it's just like, as musicians, you climb the ladder of your technique and you climb and you climb and you climb and but then you get on a gig and only 5% of what is going to apply to that particular gig. You're like, man, what? I worked on all this stuff. What the heck? But if you're not willing to go through those growing pains, and it's just like, and that's so Tyra, what's your take on, I mean, how do people know if they have it or not, or if they're the real deal? How do you know that now? Because everybody's telling you how good you are.
Man, look, you have to find whatever your niche is, and sometimes you got to throw things at the wall and see what sticks, right? But like, your validation is the work that you put into it and your studying of your craft. Those cats were playing in garage bands and stuff before they even developed whatever, but you're usually with a major person before that you're picking up stuff. Like I said before with Jimi Hendrix, man, the cat couldn't even keep strings on his guitar. Ronald Isley had to go get his guitar out of the pawn shop, and then brought him into the house, brought him into their mother's house and nurtured the cat, but they saw something in him. So whenever you have an older person see you in this mentorship position comes along, that's like the biggest thing. You know, you see Prince and Michael Jackson at a James Brown concert. He influenced both of those people, you know, and Prince is influenced by a lot of people. Everybody thinks how original Prince is, but he's really been influenced and nurtured by a lot of different people, and dare say stolen a lot of stuff from people.
Of course.
Right?
That's, I mean,
and people don't want to. People want to admit that he's just an original cat, but he's not. You know, what is being original as much as you being influenced by other people, and then your genius may take it somewhere else. But the Rolling Stones,
I think your sound you can have your own sound, but it still comes from many different things.
Yeah, you know? But you gotta be a part of around. Very rarely can people transcend that aspect of, you know, and just have the it. But you can manufacture the it, right? But it takes focus. We talked about like Usher, how Usher's mom pulled him out of everything, and when she recognized that talent, cultivated, put him around people, what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, we're in this business, and we as musicians, we can recognize other musicians that we see. It's like, oh, they have something. They just need to be cultivated. But before the sharks come in,
right,
we try to say, hey, come follow me, come do this. Now it's up to that kid to say, I'm going to do that. But we've all had mentors that we've been a part of. Even in accounting as well, you can't just have a major account like that right on the onset of your career. You got to be around people who's been doing it, you know?
Right. I mean, you have to learn some aspects of the business, but honestly, I became the tour manager, tour accountant without really any of that experience. And whether I was resented by people, I don't know, because ultimately you run into people who've been tour managing for 25 years and tour account. But
you have to learn on the fly. You have to be able to be quick about picking things up. And that's how it works with music as well.
Right. But I mean, in a sense, accounting doesn't really matter what the industry is. It's numbers, inflows and outflows, and recording them properly and keeping track of where the money is going. And you can do that as long as you've got the head for that, then, you can do that.
Yeah.
So I, basically I learned on the fly, and then we, when you're an opening act, occasionally you might ride on another tour bus, to get to the gig with another band. And we were with REO, and I noticed, he had things on the front telling everybody where they're going to be the next day and who's doing the radio station interviews and whatever, just so that people can't say, oh, I didn't know about that. So that was something interesting to learn, because.
But you pick up those things, right?
I'm an off the top of my head kind of guy, and I remember it, and I realize not everybody is like that. So there'd be times I go, hey, Pat, remember we got a radio interview at 4, and he'd go, we do, and like he wasn't really into it, but he would do it anyway. But if that information is out there in front of you day after day, it's coming up, and you can't say I didn't know about it. So
And I remember an incident where I was on the road. We'll probably talk about this on another show, Chris, but this trick that I didn't even know about, where these older musicians who've had hits, and I will say who this person is Billy Paul.
Okay.
And Billy Paul, we were in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Billy Paul came up to our band and said, hey, man, I'm an older guy and stuff. He said, do you guys mind if I go first and you guys go after us? We were like, nah, we don't mind at all. Billy Paul is about to open up for us, right? So we all, man, I'm waiting for him.
Switcheroo.
I'm waiting for him to sing Me and Mrs. Jones. He does not sing that until the very end.
Right.
He does 15 minutes of it. Keep reprising it. These Brazilians, they're singing every word.
Uh-huh.
We get on stage and everybody leaves. It was just, we played in the second song, the whole place was empty.
Right.
And dejected, we went back to the dressing room and was sitting there, and the leader of the band says, I know one thing, I'm never going after mother effing Billy Paul ever again. And that taught me something, like, do not fall for that okie doke, because that dude has a hit. It's just like you said, the opening act could be a curse.
Right.
because they're coming to see Bruce Springsteen or whatever, but they clearly knew every word of Me and Mrs.
And
Jones,
they
and
waited
he
all.
reprised it 3 times.
Right.
And that's what they were there to see in the
That's
first
what they were
place.
there to see. So when they got all that 3 times in a row, they got the reprise. They were like, "There's nothing else." Right? We got there. We're playing our behinds off, and everybody left. I was like, "Oh, this is the worst feeling in the world."
Yeah,
but you pick up those things.
That doesn't happen when the headliner goes second because they're all there for that.
Right? Exactly.
But that,
we got another
not a good feeling.
We got another question. This comes from actually my brother-in-law, Pat Yarborough. He says, "How much would the acts get for each hit single sold or albums?" Do you have any idea about that?
I mean, basically, your record contract tells what you're getting paid for, and singles, I really have no clue how much the act is getting from that. Albums used to be the act would get about $1 per record sold. That guesstimate. So if you sold 1 million records, $1 million would flow into the corporate coffers or whatever the entity that you created, and just multiply that by the number of millions. But like I said, again, if the band has advanced your recording cost or your tour support or whatever, that $1 million comes in, and then it shows like you still owe us $1.4 million, and then you don't get anything. So singles, I really don't know what the payout rate is. It's probably something you can even just Google. There's like minimum requirements, standard royalty, standard contracts where those things are laid out. And then there's free goods. I mean, record company contracts are just, I won't get into it, but there's, percentage for free goods and goods and promotional copies and you name it.
Oh yeah, the record companies keep receipts.
Yes.
And utilize it very well. Mary J. Blige had a hit record, was still living in the projects.
Right.
And so
Tommy James.
Right.
If you read his book, he goes, I didn't know you're supposed to get royalties on record sales. I mean, and the Roulette sold his inventory to Rounder put out the reissues, and he got a $2 million royalty check, and he was like, I never saw this kind of money in my life until it got sold to Rounder.
Wow.
Interesting read.
Very.
And then Pat has another question. He said, "What were some of the funniest things?" Say. Just give us a little. I think
the crew bus is where it's at. That's all I'll say. The band bus. We spent a lot of time watching Richard Pryor on the video and all of that stuff, town to town, listening to the night show as you drive to the next city. I'll tell you my funniest story, and we'll leave it at that. We're driving, I think it was like Lawrence, Kansas, or Normal, Kansas, out to Albuquerque, and we're driving for an hour or two, and the bus stops at McDonald's. And I had been in the back lounge playing Space Invaders on the video thing.
Atari, yeah.
So we go out into McDonald's, and some guys get off the bus, and some guys stay on the bus. And I'm going in and waiting on line. And I happen to turn around, and the bus pulls out without me. And it's my job to tell the bus driver, hey, let's go. Everybody's on the bus. And in this case, the bass player thought I was in the back lounge, didn't see me come out. He goes, yeah, Mark's in the back. Everybody's here. Let's go. So I'm like, this is pre-cell phone. This is 1979, whatever. So what do? And I know there's contraband on the bus. So I call the state troopers. And I basically say, hey, I'm in here. The bus has left me behind. I got to get out there. I'm not near an airport or whatever, and the troopers pulled the bus over and turned it around, and it came back to pick me up.
Wow. Classic.
Yes.
Oh wow.
That's one on me, but I would say that's the funniest thing that happened to me. Like I said, the crew bus was where the action was.
Right.
Cool. I think that let's see if there's any more questions. Brian laughed at that.
I'm laughing too.
Well, man, let's sort of just. obviously we're gonna do. There's so much more to cover. One thing I want to run by your ear is, and Tyrone kind of touched on this in terms of like how would you start a tour now, but just for people who, young people that have aspirations of just getting any kind of music, getting a music career going and trying to start a band, and uh you know maybe they've gotten to a point to where they've basically got a little set going and they've got
Hmm.
some music and stuff like that. What would your advice be to them about the you know the next steps to start going in a professional direction?
I mean, I think you just gotta, practice, practice, practice. Put in the time. Work on all your songs. Whether you're gonna, you're gonna need to have original material if you're gonna be a successful artist. For the most part, in the rock vein, there's not a lot of cover acts. These days, it's not like the old days where Dionne Warwick would be covering Burt Bacharach songs and things like that. So you've got to get the songs, and the songs are the key to anything. I think you guys would, whether it's jazz or rock or soul or pop, whatever, the song's not there, why even bother? But do that and get those songs, and then play and play. Play your neighborhood block party, play for your friends in your friend's basement, play, and then ultimately people will start hearing about you somehow if you're good enough, and you can go to the Smith Soul Bar or to some of the smaller clubs and just bring a cassette or whatever, because they've got to fill 7 nights of music, a lot of these places. So they're looking for acts on the cheap that can come in and sell some tickets to your friends or whatever to start the ball rolling. And once people hear about you, and if you're good enough, the word of mouth will get out there. And whether the record company ever gets involved, who knows? But at some point, you just keep doing it, and hopefully things fall into place. But there's no guarantees, and the best don't always make it. And it's a lot of right place, right time, and connections, and all of that stuff. But
You
I think
you
this
said a word.
songs.
Mark, sorry to cut you off, Mark. You said a word that younger people don't understand, and that word is cheap. You said on the cheap.
Uh,
And I don't think they really understand that you're not going to get $200, $500 or whatever on these gigs right away. I mean, you have to make that sacrifice, right?
right, you're gonna have to play for free,
Yes.
or for drinks or
Right.
food or whatever, because nobody's gonna give you money if you're not bringing in any bodies in the seats.
Right.
And until you get out there and prove what you're worth and what you can do, that's when you'll start seeing some money. It's
Right.
not going to be enough to really keep you going at the beginning. You're going to have financial support some way, shape, or form. There's a
Right.
guy. His name is Michael Dolan. I don't know if you know him. He owns the Knicks and the Rangers in Madison
Yes.
Square Garden. He
Yes.
thinks he's a rock star. He opened up for Don Henley at the Fox. I'm like, who is this guy? But
Right.
he's got billions, and he can go out and open
Right.
up at the Fox. So
Right.
he doesn't care if he's losing his shirt every night. He's probably flying privately city to
Right.
city, but it's coming out of his pocket, I'm sure.
Right.
So not everybody can do that.
No.
What's your opinion on uh the tribute,
Uh,
these tribute
I knew
acts?
this was coming. Not a big fan. I was lucky enough or old enough to see most of these bands in the real incarnation. Um, I don't mind bands that have their own thing doing a Steely Dan night and covering the Steely Dan catalog, or doing a night or whatever. But as long as they're doing their own thing normally, and this is just a special night. But a band that's reliving Guns N' Roses or the Stones or whatever, and they have the look and the thing, looking at a 60-year-old guy with a long wig on and spandex pants, I just doesn't do it for me. What can I say?
I mean, that's what is getting booked,
I know multiple
you know.
places all around town.
And there's, I mean, I'm not gonna. I mean, there's some. I mean, there's a Led Zeppelin tribute that I think very highly of.
Right.
Now they were doing that way
Long time ago.
before
Yes, I remember.
it was even, it was even a thing, and they're really, really, really good. And they've even dropped some of. They still have a little bit of the cosplay, but it's not as much about that now. It's
Right, right,
more
right.
about,
The music.
you know, the music. We're going to
Mhm.
play deep cuts. We're not just going to do all the hits, et cetera, et
Right, right,
cetera.
right.
Zoso is who I'm talking about. They're
Yeah,
really good.
I kind of figured.
And but some of these I just, I'm like, and they're taking up the slots of where some of these other people who have, original music and are
Right, right,
really out there busting their butts and have great have a great product, but they can't get booked in these places anymore. It's all about these tribute acts,
right.
you
And
Well,
know?
I mean,
go
if you
ahead, Tony.
think about classical music as well, they're playing the same stuff they've been playing. Mozart, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, Fifth Symphony, and stuff like that. Very
Right,
rarely are they playing what
Right,
new artists or
right,
composers are writing. So, I mean, you get to a point where the music gets exhausted, where there's the climax of, I mean, Led Zeppelin, and where do you go from there?
right,
So the thing is, you start rejecting this notion of 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 the best, and then you dumb it down. You see it in
mhm,
hip hop music, right? So you're gonna yearn for the better things, of course. So in classical music is the same thing, like, oh, we're not promoting new composers because the height of the classical era was the Romantic period
right, right,
or
What
Impressionistic
about jazz?
period.
Jazz, man? It's like, dude,
Same thing,
Gershwin was popular back then.
right, right,
When Sarah Vaughan and Dinah Washington and
right?
these people were covering, that was pop. That was like, those were popular
right, right.
artists,
Hmm.
But you're going to continue to do that now, like, w-
It hit the pinnacle of the, I mean, classical and jazz with only 0.8% of the music or whatever. I mean, it's just like it hit the pinnacle. If you get somebody who comes out who is starting new standards, you know and um it's evolved to be jazz blended, not jazz, or
right,
or
right,
rock blend. Like,
right,
what is alternative rock but a fusion of something with something else?
Right.
And so, what is true rock music these days? Have we reached the pinnacle of that music? And
I think we passed the pinnacle of rock music in a sense.
right. So
Uh,
where do you go? I mean, where do you go from there?
But it's morphed into all these,
Right.
metal and all kinds of different genres of rock music.
Exactly. And that's the
And
same thing we're doing with jazz. We're
right,
dealing
but
with
it's
the
all
same
all
right,
thing.
becoming very
right.
niche, and you
Right.
don't even know about what's going on, with the other parts of it.
Right.
And I just
Right.
and man, and because Tyra, we've never really kind of talked, but you use the word niche a lot, and I'm trying to, and I know what you mean when
Mhm.
you say that,
Right.
but when people actually take that verbatim, I think is the problem, because if you just gonna just do one thing, okay, now what am I trying to say? So, like, if um to say that you're good at, okay, so I'm good at this, so I shouldn't have to work on the other things that I'm not good at, because
No.
that's not what you're, but that's, I think, how people take that, is when people talk about finding a niche, it's, I only do this thing, and that's all I do.
Well,
Is
when
that,
you
you
when
know,
you look at the levels of musicianship and level of artistry, niche is going to be relative to that. I'll give you an example. If you're going to use props and stuff like that, maybe your music is not good enough.
Right.
right,
Hmm.
But
absolutely.
if you're at a certain level, then
Then you
your
can maybe
niche is
right. Then you
right. Your
use
niche,
right, right,
and I tell my students all the time, if 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 I had a meeting with the president of the United States and I had cut off jeans and a bandana around my head, they wouldn't let me in. But Willie Nelson could do it.
Right.
Willie Nelson would get absolutely, because he has the cultural
right,
capital to see
Right.
the.
right,
And we know Willie Nelson smokes more weed than anybody,
Right.
but he'll be able to see the president before I do. You know what I'm
Right.
right,
saying?
Hmm.
right,
And so I can't do the things that Willie Nelson is. And his niche is that he's freaking Willie Nelson. He can
Right.
wear a headband and cut off jeans and shake hands with the doggone president.
right.
And I'd get intercepted by the Secret Service every time if I
Right.
decided to do that.
Sure.
So a niche is relative to your level. And then some people, I saw a guy was playing with Larry Colton, opening act, came in and this guy had a drill on his guitar. And we're like, bro, what is this? A magic trick? We
Really?
want to hear music, bro. You know. So what is that now? And then we get in the dumbing down of audiences too, where does it even matter how high your artistry level is?
Mhm.
So
growing up as a kid, we're listening to radio in the 60s, it was AM radio
right,
and a limited number of slots, and all the genres of music had to fight to get played on the radio. So basically the best bubble to the top, I mean, is the only way I can describe it. But it could be 96 Tears by Question Mark and the Mysterians, or Wooly Bully, or it's Herb Alpert, or it's Aretha Franklin, it's the Beatles, it's Boy Named Sue by Johnny Cash. But you got exposed to everything.
Right.
Right.
That's right.
And
That's right.
that formed my appreciation of all kinds of music, and good music versus no, I don't. That's crap. When everybody's got to fight to be heard, I think it brings out the best. And maybe there was payola involved or whatever, but the cream rose to the top, and you heard it all.
right,
Yeah.
And you were exposed to it all. It wasn't like, oh man, I only listened to death metal and I don't know anything else, or I only listen to Taylor Swift and I don't know anything else. There you got to hear everybody.
right.
Yeah, that started when the categories of music began to and they started to set. I mean, it is a form of segregation, but more of like the record companies figured out they could make more money.
Yeah.
They could make more money off of if we can promote this slot to this group of people, we're going to make more, so
right. You have more of a captive audience to the stuff you want to push, because
and with the Radio One or whatever the name of the things controlling all the radio stations, you can't blend this different. You have to niche out each individual band for what it's going to play, because the minute you have crossover, you're going to be sucking the life out of something else that you own. You can't do that,
exactly. And it's all programmed, from the corporate office, and there's no DJs or whatever.
Right. So I'm not going to on 109.5 play a rock song when I'm having on 92.5 rock music. I'm just going to be taken from my own place. You see that now, even with movies, when they do movies, product placement, you have to make sure Pepsi and Taco Bell are together.
Because they're both corporate.
Exactly. It's a lot. And even marketing, what you see on TV now, that the brands have to be together or are fitting together, It's crazy.
Yeah, it is.
We have another comment by Superfan Brad. He says, good point. When was the last time a new Herbie Hancock piece became popular? Even Herbie said that nowadays it's the popularity of the artist people rate about now and not the music. So that's a good point, because social media is everything to a lot of people. And if social media doesn't tell you that somebody's good, then that influences what you think about, rather than you actually listening. And how can you tell anyway? It's only 15-30 seconds of something that gets presented. So
but you got to also think about algorithms too. I mean, like Spotify has that function, says if you like this, maybe you like this. Amazon does it, right? If you like this,
all of them do it.
Maybe you like this, and you go on, click on it, it's like, maybe I do like this. So
that's how my daughter hears new music. Either her
I like
turn her onto it, or she watches, he listens to something, and they go, "You might like this one," and that's the way.
I think it's a good function. You discover, and it's a way that you take control of your own taste right now, where you can search for things. So I think it's cool.
I don't know where Herbie Hancock is getting played that people even, hear his new music.
Right,
You
right,
look at the MTV era with Rocket. I mean, totally different. He was all over,
right,
but now
right.
Yeah. Well,
totally different.
legacy artists, are a little bit different
Right.
because, there's already millions of people that already follow and know and love them.
Sure.
So they tend to, they can kind of do a little bit more of what they want.
Yeah,
But anyway, man.
I mean,
Hey,
some people will buy the new album of one of their favorite artists, no matter what it comes out. They're
yeah.
buying it, and
Herbie has a, and I'm a fan of Herbie's. I
yeah,
don't have his new album, but I remember when I saw him in concert, he said that Terrace Martin, who's a young producer who produced with Robert Glasper
yeah.
and stuff, was producing his next album. And I was kind of excited about it a little bit, but I still didn't buy the album. After talking now to you guys, I might have to check it out because
Yeah,
it is new music for
but
it
you
him.
is
can
new
preview it on Spotify or whatever, before
Right.
you lay down the money.
yeah.
Right,
And
of course.
also somebody like Herbie he's kind of always on the cutting edge of tech. He's
Right.
very into tech and moving forward. That's why
Right.
he's
Right.
not a fan
Transcended so many generations.
Hmm.
of what he wants to move forward with stuff, and so he's always looking for new ideas, uh new people to play with. That's just sort of, and that's what makes him you
Him.
know
Right.
what he is.
Hmm.
In the rock arena, I'm not sure who would be the equivalent of, because I don't really know if Springsteen or these guys, how they're in, how much they're into tech or their social media or all those kinds of things. I mean, I'm assuming that there are some, but I'm just not sure
You
what.
know, I really couldn't say. Springsteen seems to me, not that technically oriented, but I
Hmm.
don't know.
Hmm.
But I'm trying to think of artists who are trying to take that technology to the next level.
I mean, U2 was one of the band that was always sort of on to the next thing. I don't know what I haven't followed them in a long
Yeah,
time, so I
I
don't
mean,
know what they're
musically, they're
doing.
always looking at, for a couple of years they were samey, and then they try to reinvent their
Right,
music,
right,
which
right,
is, that's what the Beatles did every record, and the Stones
right.
kind of the same vein, but they experimented. Um,
Doesn't seem
so
to be much of that though. Well,
yeah,
I don't know. I mean, maybe
I,
there is. I don't. I guess I'm
What
not the
what
guy
would
to.
these contemporary Christian groups be without you too? Ooh. They got they got tutorials about the YouTube foot pedals and sounds that you need
Man,
to
did I
get to
tell
get
you?
that
I
thing.
told
really,
you about when I played
Yes.
that church, and the guitar player literally had a case for um his pedals that was the size of, man, this thing was
Like
so
a
big I'd
briefcase,
never
right?
even seen a. I
uh
was like,
huh,
dude, are you going on the road or
right,
something?
uh
Like,
huh.
small dude, got all the tight stuff on. It's like 7 a.m, bro, coming in, and they were rehearsing before the band that I was playing. I had two bands, so this is like
Really,
the youth. This is
Yeah.
the youth. This dude, I'm telling you, he came strapped. I mean, when you talk about what's the line from the Untouchables where Sean Connery is talking about never bring
uh,
a knife to a gunfight.
right,
Yeah,
right, yeah.
This cat was
This cat
bringing
had a
Uzis.
bazooka.
He was
Guns to the
bringing
knife fight. Yeah,
he was bringing M60 machine
well,
guns.
we need
To
to have a
this, he
battle of the
was,
bands with my synagogue band against your church band. We'll
man.
see
What
how that
happened,
goes.
man? Don't you think that would be a cool thing to do? Is bring back Battle of the Bands, though?
Yeah, yeah.
Bring back Battle of the Bands, man.
Hmm.
And hey, Mark, you're looking at the battle of the bands right here for our church because it's just me. It's just me and Chris
That's it.
right now. Yeah.
Really.
Man, it's
We
so
got a
beautiful,
great bass
man.
player.
It's
Our chorus leader is a great bass player and musician. Maybe there's a place for him with you guys.
Right. Maybe so. Maybe so. But battle of the bands would be cool,
Yeah.
man.
I think, man,
Hmm.
it's got to. I think bring it
Napoleons
back.
needs to do that. Battle of the bands at
Ah,
Napoleons.
there you
Battle of the
go.
Bands, man. Well, thank y'all so much. I think we're gonna wrap
Man.
it up there.
This
We
has been fun.
got a
I
lot
think I
more.
didn't curse once.
Yes.
Mark, you get the let's see, how should we say? Let's see, the apple pie. We'll give you the apple
Okay,
pie.
I think I said one word, but it wasn't really a
Award.
4-letter word.
I just wanted to challenge you, man. Just
Okay.
to see, you need new challenges to
Now that I'm retired, I got to look for things that I can accomplish in a day.
Well, look,
and not cursing is one of them.
We'll do another one, and you can let it fly, brother.
Okay.
Let it fly.
And
all Brooklyn.
And your wife didn't walk in one time and put her finger up like.
Hey,
I hope you didn't hear the dogs barking behind me at times.
Right.
He had the cleaning crew though earlier.
He had
the cleaning crew. You heard the vacuum and stuff. Man, he had to walk back there. Hey, what the heck you guys doing?
Right,
I'm in here having a
professional thing going on down here.
Hey, Mark, it was so great having you on here, man. You're welcome back anytime.
I want to say what an honor. You guys are just immensely talented young men, and it's a thrill and an honor to be part of this.
Oh,
hey, man. Well, there's going to be a lot more coming, and we want to welcome you to part of the team.
Thanks.
And we're gonna find, we're gonna find a role for you, man. We think like Bill Belichick, man.
Okay.
We don't know what position you're gonna play.
Gotcha.
But we're gonna figure something out for you.
We're gonna have the red phone for you, bro. When we got
power forward.
Right. Power
forward.
He said he had big feet, bro. You know what I'm saying?
Nothing wrong with being a 6 man off the bench, though. 6 man off the bench.
Yeah,
we got to put him in, bro.
Hey, man, when we're talking about the backup quarterback, that's the best job in sports. It's a backup quarterback.
Get paid those big bucks and get splinters all day. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Clean uniform, man.
That's right. Don't have to wash it.
Tell a starter, you good, man? You good today? How you feeling? You good? Right. Hey, man, keep that arm iced up, bro.
I'm ready. Put me in, coach. I'm ready.
Right.
This was a thrill. Really a thrill.
Thank you, guys. Yeah. Hey, man, thanks for coming on. Please, support the channel. Go to the YouTube and subscribe to our channel. Like, share, tell other people about it. I had some really great comments last night at the session. Nancy Gaddy, who I'll give Nancy a shout out, man. She's got a show coming up at Napoleon's, I think this Friday.
Gonna go see it. Yeah.
Sexy at 60 or something like that.
Sexy at 60. And Nancy's been around forever. Great entertainer. Just a fun person. But she was coming out with somebody else and stopped me and was like, man, Jez, another shout out to Jez Graham, who's and Jez will be on the show. Great piano player, great friend, great keyboard player. Word of mouth. He told her about she was asking, man, where can I find the jam session episode? Because I really want to see that. So people are talking about it, and so hopefully that will start to just get conversation going, because that's really what we want to. It's just get conversation going and talk amongst the people that we have here, and then reaching out also to people all around the world who have their own pockets of community and are dealing with the same things that we deal with on a regular basis, of just being a regular working cat and try to deal with all these situations and bring guys. There's are there more Marks around the world? I mean, I think there's only one.
Sure.
Mark,
I mean,
but,
there can't be only one of me. Maybe only one with this name. But there's, there are tour accountants, tour managers, lighting designers.
Man.
All over.
Tell your story. That's what I guess that's what we're trying to tell your story, and other people. There's other people that are going to relate to it.
One quick story about Nancy Gaddy. My daughter will be 27 in November, and when she was bat mitzvah at 13, most people have the Mike Veal band as their entertainment or something like that. She wanted a klezmer band.
Wow.
So where do you find a klezmer band in Atlanta? And Gwen Hughes, who's friends of ours, said Nancy Gaddy's got this klezmer band, and she performs as Mrs. Schmaltz, which is the Jewish word for chicken fat.
Oh, wow.
Which is delicious, by the way. And she performed as Mrs. Schmaltz in the klezmer band, and that's our connection almost 14 years ago.
Wow.
Awesome.
Wait till I see Nancy again.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Awesome.
Call her Mrs. Schmaltz.
Mrs. Schmaltz. There it is.
All right, cool. All right, y'all. Thank you so much. This will be up on the YouTube channel. For
Great talking to you.
Sharing.
Yes,
and
amen.
my man Mark, I will see you
Tomorrow.
probably tomorrow night at the Mike Bill
I'm
show
planning
at
on
Tin
it.
Roof.
Mm-hmm.
And also a shout out to my man Tyrone Jackson. Please pay attention to what he's doing with the Balzer Theater.
Yes.
And we've got some upcoming shows at the Balzer, which is connected to in the same building as the Rialto, formerly Theatrical Outfit. And we're going to be talking a lot more about his plans and some of the upcoming things that he's going to be doing there, and big things that he wants to do there. And we want all of y'all to be a part of that as well. So yeah,
Beautiful.
Sounds good.
All right, so peace out. Thank you for joining us, Local Musicians XP, and we will see you guys next week. Chop it up. Are we back on the next 8:00 next week, man?
8:00. Chop it up Tuesday.
All right, 8:00. Chop it up Tuesdays, and we will have another special guest that we will announce later this week. All right, thank y'all. See y'all.
Take care.
Peace.
Bye.